Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Coffee Break for cover crops. As you can see, I have not had enough coffee yet this morning, but I just got myself a cup and I'm ready to roll into today's presentation, which I'll be giving Dr. Heather Darby, University of Vermont Extension, and I'll be talking today about cover crop termination, different strategies we have available to us, and some of the pros and cons of implementing those strategies. All right, so there's probably more strategies than this because cover cropping is really gaining a lot of ground on farms, and so people are coming up with unique ways to sort of manage and grow and terminate cover crops. But this is the sort of short, long list that I came up with. Cover crops can be terminated through mechanical termination, and that might include tillage, so actually turning the cover crop into the soil. It might also include rolling down the cover crop and crimping it, and we'll talk about each of those strategies. Some farmers also choose to use or may choose to use chemical termination to kill cover crops in the spring. We also have winter termination, which are cover crops that are actually killed by cold temperatures. We have some strategies being implemented where farmers are actually letting the cover crops continue to live on during the growing season. These are called living mulches. Cover crops can also be terminated by harvesting them for feed, both grazing and stored feed. And then within this sort of list of cover crop termination strategies, people can combine and are combining multiple approaches. So what choice should you make? Really depends on lots of factors on the farm, and generally, not always. Some of these are predetermined, before the cover crop's even in the ground, and sometimes a termination strategy is implemented a bit last minute or on the fly due to weather constraints. So farmers may choose to select a termination strategy that fits into their current cropping system. So for example, with a no-till system, if they're not actually able to incorporate the cover crop, then they may choose chemical termination, or they may choose to roll and crimp the cover crop, or have a living mulch. In an organic cropping system, a living mulch may be implemented, or a rolled down cover crop. And then also the type of soil on that farm may also influence how that cover crop is terminated. Of course, weather is a huge factor in how farmers decide to terminate cover crops. Here's an example over to the left here, which is a strategy that many farmers use. If it's a dry spring, farmers may try to terminate the cover crop immediately so that the cover crop does not take up too much soil moisture. And in a wet spring, they may choose to let the cover crop grow longer so that it does dry out the soil. And the same thing depending on if it's a warm season or a cool spring, farmers may choose to terminate the cover crop in different ways because it's growing too fast and getting ahead of them, or maybe it's so cool they'll let it grow longer to get more growth and terminate it with another strategy. Farm goals obviously have a big impact on how a farmer chooses to terminate a cover crop. Environmental needs, if the farmer's on a very sloped ground, they may choose to roll down the cover crop so that there's lots of residue still on the soil to stop erosion. They may also choose to terminate with an herbicide for the same reasons. If a farmer needs additional feed for their animals, they may choose to harvest the cover crop instead of plowing it under and leaving it in the field. A farmer may choose to plow the cover crop under to get immediate nitrogen credits. They may choose to let the cover crop grow longer and roll it down to further improve the soil, adding organic matter. And again, they may choose to plow the crop under or use a no-till herbicide system to boost crop yields. But really the choice of termination is driven by a multitude of factors on the farm, both sort of long-term decisions and also short-term needs. All right, so let's first talk about mechanical termination, which is very straightforward. Obviously, there's lots of ways to till under cover crops. There's traditional moldboard plowing, which we're trying to get farmers to move away from a little bit because there's other damaging effects to the soil from full tillage. And then there's minimum tillage. This is actually a vertical till system that only incorporates the cover crop in the top, 3 to 4 inches of the soil. You can see behind the vertical tillage here what the soil looks like after the cover crop's incorporated. So there's lots of benefits to plowing the cover crop under or incorporating the cover crop. And the primary benefit that we see from doing that is actual meeting fertility needs of the crop. So by plowing the cover crop under, it comes in contact with the soil directly and the soil microbes, and the microbes will break down those cover crops, releasing nutrients to the cash crop, to corn or soybeans or whatever's growing there. So that's really the primary benefit to plowing under a cover crop. Now, when do you choose to terminate it with mechanical tillage? Most farmers choose to terminate a cover crop right around this stage here, which is before the cover crop starts to go into what we call the jointing stage, or the stage at which the cover crop will begin to go into more of a reproductive mode. So you can see how vegetative the cover crop is here. It's about 6 to 8 inches tall. And at this stage, you're getting a decent amount of organic matter added back to the soil, and you're also getting a cover crop that has high or low carbon to nitrogen ratio. So if you look over here at this table, this is a great table that was developed by NRCS. It shows you the carbon to nitrogen ratio of different crop residues and cover crop residues. So you can see here when you plow under a rye cover crop in the vegetative stage, the carbon to nitrogen ratio is 26 to 1. Okay, and if you look over at our little table here with the rabbit and the turtle, you can see as the carbon to nitrogen ratio goes down, the plant material decomposes faster. And when the plant material decomposes faster, it actually releases nutrients, especially nitrogen, more quickly to your crop. So one of the reasons that farmers terminate at this stage is to get that nitrogen and fertility to the crop. Now, if we wait and terminate the cover crop at a more mature stage, it actually takes a much slower time for those nutrients to be released. And that's generally at a disadvantage to the crop itself. All right. Now, if you're trying to decide how much nitrogen you're actually going to get from your cover crop, I thought I would put up a couple of slides on how to calculate that. Farmers are always asking, how much nitrogen am I going to get from my winter cover crop, my winter rye cover crop, or even my clover? And, short of actually going out there and taking plant samples and sending them into the lab, the other best guess method is found right here. And this is actually adapted from Marianne Sarantonio's book, the Northeast Cover Crop book, and it's an excellent resource for anybody who doesn't have it. And these tables can be found in there. But essentially, if you're looking at a grass cover crop, which most people are, here's grasses above ground. Pre-flowering is the stage I was just talking about. Those cover crops have about 2 to 3.5% nitrogen in their plant tissue, okay, on average. And you can see that percent nitrogen goes down as the crop becomes more mature. So if you're after nitrogen fertility, you really want to plow under at this point in time, okay? Now from there, once you have the percent nitrogen, you can estimate dry matter or the amount of biomass that you have using this table. So simply look at the height of the cover crop and the percent ground cover, so how much of the ground is covered by cover crop. And usually this time of the year you're generally looking at 80 to 100%, and you're looking at about 8 inches of cover crop growth. So that would give you somewhere between 1,000 pounds of dry matter up to 2,000 pounds of dry matter. Okay, so about a half to a ton of dry matter. And these are great estimates. They're actually pretty accurate. So once you know the amount of dry matter, the amount of cover, and the percent nitrogen, okay, you've estimated all of those pieces, then you can actually do simple multiplication and figure out what the potential nitrogen is from that cover crop. And again, it's just the dry matter of the cover crop times the percent of that cover crop and ground cover times the percent nitrogen. Okay, and again, that's in this handbook, but that's an easy way to do a best guess estimate of nitrogen at the time that you plow down that crop. All right, another way to mechanically terminate is through rolling and crimping. This has not really caught on in Vermont anyway. We've done some research on it, and this is one of those strategies that we have a lot of work to do. So essentially, you roll down the mature cover crop. Okay, you can see it's not in the vegetative stage with the implement that you see here, and you're rolling it and crimping it. And the crimping action at the very mature stage kills the cover crop, okay, if it's done at the right stage, and you can see where it's been crimped here. Okay, and then a farmer would then go in and plant with a no-till planter into the mechanically killed cover crop. Okay, and you can see the advantage to this strategy is lots of cover, reducing erosion, keeping the soil a little bit cooler, especially in the summer, lots of organic matter and biomass added here. So this is a great strategy, but the unfortunate part for us is that we haven't yet perfected this for Vermont, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Sorry, I shouldn't have skipped ahead so fast. Just to be clear about this, the cover crop needs to be rolled at the flowering stage. That's when you get the best control, 85% control. So the flowering stage here in Vermont is at the end of May, June, which is at the very end of planting corn here in this state, which is why it hasn't really taken off, and we need to work more on this strategy. That's one of the reasons. But this is a great tool to be used in soybeans, which are planted later into June. All right, so again, this is critical, fully emerged before you roll it down. Right? This is a tool very similar, same concept that we're trying to bring into Vermont. Hopefully we'll get the funding to do so. This is a tool that was developed by a farm in Pennsylvania, and you can see the roller is right on the planter. Here's a picture of the roller here. I'll go back up here, and you can see that they're planting and rolling at the same time with the roller right on the planter. And there's some different strategies that are being used here, again, that combine herbicides and rolling and crimping, and hopefully we'll be looking at those in Vermont very soon. I think this we could be doing. And again, here's the result. This is actually on my farm with watermelons, and you can see all the nice cover crop mat underneath and actually the nice soil condition under that. All right, so the issue we have here in Vermont is that this is the roller crimper available nitrogen across the season, and you can see how much lower it is, okay, available nitrogen to the crop than actually plowing down the cover crop, okay? So plowing down the cover crop, vegetative, the microbes eat it fast. Rolling it down, very mature cover crop, the microbes actually need nitrogen out of the soil to break it down, and it takes nitrogen away from the crop. Okay, so this is another issue that we have here in Vermont. Here's our table again. Rye cover crop anthesis, 37:1 carbon to nitrogen ratio, slow breakdown. Okay, this is the issue we have in Vermont. How do we overcome that? In other places where they're using this practice, they're growing hairy vetch. You can see the vetch in the cover crop in with the winter rye. And again, we're trying to do work to build that strategy here in Vermont, but we have a lot of work to do to get broad-scale adoption of this termination strategy. Okay, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on chemical termination. Bill Curran talked quite a bit about herbicides last week, but it is a strategy that's especially common in no-till systems where farmers will plant corn no-till and then go through and spray their herbicide. And it's not just an herbicide to actually kill the cover crop. It's usually the general herbicide program that's used in the corn to begin with. So I think some people feel that farmers may be using more herbicides with cover crops, and that's actually not true. It's the same herbicide program that they're using, slightly modified to accommodate for also killing the cover crops. And of course the benefit to this is you have a lot of residue here still, a lot of plant residue protecting the soil throughout the whole season. And here's just some pictures of a farmer no-tilling into a green cover crop, and then this would be sprayed afterwards. All right, winter-killed cover crops are gaining some interest in Vermont, but again, not that popular. Here's a winter cover crop in Quebec. This is chickling vetch, and you can see how beautiful it is. Come next spring, this will be completely dead, and the farmer will be planting corn into the ridges here. Now, the benefit of a winter-killed cover crop, of course, is that you don't have to deal with it the next spring. No, additional herbicides. You can go right into a no-till system, or till that under without it growing too fast in the spring. Examples of winter-killed cover crops here. Go back here. Here's a whole list of them, but some common ones people recognize are oats, radishes, annual rye in most years. And some clovers like crimson clover, and some vetches like chickling vetch. So here's a cover crop that's on the verge of being winter killed. Okay, here's some annual ryegrass going into the fall. Again, most of the time winter kills, did not winter kill last winter. And here's a mixture of winter peas and radishes and some annual ryegrass. Okay, so all of these we would expect to be dead the next spring. Here's some pictures of winter-killed oats. I took this yesterday. Okay, these were planted in September and August, right here. And then here's a picture of tillage radishes, what's left to them come the next spring. Here's just the radish holes, some dead radishes, and some leaf material. Okay, so the benefit again to this is you get some cover in the fall, mostly through the winter. The cover crop's gone the next spring, so you don't really need to worry about it too much. Gives you a lot of flexibility in the spring. The downside, of course, is there's not a lot of cover here in the spring left to minimize erosion. And we're not overly sure what happens to the nutrients. Kirsten Workman, who you'll hear from next week, has been doing some work on this, but we're not really sure what happens to the nutrients in those winter-killed cover crops. So we're not sure what kind of fertility benefit you're going to get from those the next season. Here's a radish. I took this yesterday that's decomposing, and there's plant roots actually feeding off the nutrients. Pretty cool. Okay, we'll wrap up with a few last strategies that, again, living mulches are not being implemented in Vermont at this time, but it is a possibility, and Dan Hudson and myself and Jeff Carter are going to try to do some work on this. There's a decent publication put out by Iowa State University that talks a bit about living mulches and corn and soybean systems. And probably the most popular living mulch that's been studied has been Kira clover, which is a very hardy, persistent clover that kind of can survive the traffic and the shading and all the components of using a living mulch. So, this cover crop is planted, allowed to establish, And then various systems are used to manage and suppress it in the early spring. And depending on your farming system, this might include actual mowing or grazing, using flame weeding and or herbicides, or combination of these options to essentially set back the cover crop in the spring so that you can plant, here's the row, what used to be soybeans, into it, and the crop actually has a chance to get up and grow before the cover crop begins to grow back. And theoretically, you know, the goal is that the cash crop like corn or soybeans would grow quick enough to then shade and suppress the mulch throughout the growing season. Again, we have not implemented this in Vermont. I think there's a good possibility that, you know, we could come up with some strategies that work for this, but we need to do some research to better understand the system here in Vermont. All right, so I'll wrap up with harvesting for feed, which has become very popular both for grazing and for stored feed, and this is really great. It allows the farmer a lot of flexibility in sort of terminating the crop. So, you know, if the cover crop gets ahead of them, and there's too much biomass here, okay, really to plow under, it makes it difficult to plow it under when there's a lot there. Farmers have been choosing to go out and either graze it first or again harvest it for stored feed for haylage or baleage. And then once they do that, they're going back in and tilling under the crop residue, the you know, what's remaining there, or going in and no-tilling and potentially spraying out with herbicides as well. So we have a lot of farmers grazing this feed, and again, then going in afterwards and planting another crop, so double and triple cropping in some cases. And here's some grazed triticale. And after this, the farmer will actually plant some Sudan grass. This is really great for the farm, actually, because what we found is that farmers can go out and actually start grazing their cover crops and get some feed in the animals, get the cows out of the barn before they're able to even pasture their perennial cool season grasses. So we already have farmers up here in the northern part of the state that have cows out on cover crops, and their regular pasture isn't ready. So there's a lot of advantages to this, and they can actually, in some cases, graze it a couple of times. All right. Now, if they're taking it for stored feed, again, many farmers are choosing winter rye as the cover crop because it's ready to be harvested for stored feed. Here you see in May, about the third week of May, and that allows them to take a cutting of forage. Then they still have time to go back in and plant corn. So winter rye and some triticale varieties head out early or move into the boot stage early and allow the farmer to go out and have enough feed to harvest and put it into an ag bag or bale. So again, this allows the farmer a lot of flexibility and termination. And this graph here essentially shows different types of cover crops that farmers are growing when they're ready to be harvested for stored feed. You can see spelt is rather late, and then what kind of yields they'll get from doing that. All right, and you can see winter rye is a very popular choice for farmers. Okay, so to wrap up, there's lots of innovation, again, in both termination strategies and cover cropping in general. This is just a brief overview of potential termination strategies farmers are using, why they're using them, and then what we're moving into the future. Who knows? Here's some strip cropping using radishes and winter rye. Sky's the limit. It's actually a really exciting time right now. And I'll just end by saying there's no wrong choices here. In terms of termination, there's a lot of flexibility, a lot of options, and really that's great because that allows us to choose a practice or a termination strategy that fits for the farm goals, and also for the season. And ultimately, no matter what choice that farmer makes, right down here in the soil is benefiting. Irregardless of what they choose, growing cover crops is benefiting that farm. And I'll wrap up with that.
Great. Thanks, Heather. So what we're going to do is we're going to switch gears a little bit. We're going to just ask you to answer a couple of quick poll questions. So one is just popped right up on the screen now. So what you're going to do is just respond to one of those answers to that question. Did you learn anything new today? So if you could just answer that question, and then we have one more. Great. That's really helpful. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to just switch over to our next question here. And as a result of what you learned, will you make a change on your farm or how you advise farmers? If you could just respond to that question. And then we'll just switch right on over. We have about 4 minutes left of our session today for questions for Heather. And there are already some questions in the queue, but as a reminder to pose a question, you're just going to type it into the question box there and hit return, and I'll just read those right out loud to Heather. Great, I'm going to close this for us. Thank you for responding to those questions. So Heather, are there any no-till methods that yield anywhere close to the same amount of nitrogen in the soil as can be gotten from tilling?
Yes, absolutely. I think the advantage with tilling is that the nitrogen is there, relatively immediate, meaning that it comes in contact with the microbes and starts to break down right away. So within about 30 days, that nitrogen becomes available to the crop. Now, in a no-till system, if you're using rolling and crimping, you're putting in a lot of organic matter, and although that ties up nitrogen over the short term, eventually that will be released. And a no-till rolling crimping system that combines legumes with the grass, you don't have those same issues. I don't know if that, and then in a chemical killed system, the nitrogen again gets released more slowly. So it's not that it, isn't there, it just takes more time.
Okay, great. We want to interseed. What is the best cover crop to use, and what height should the corn be? And I know we're going to be talking about that in the next couple of weeks, but if you wanted to give an answer to that, that would be great.
Yeah, interseeding, and well, I'll start with what height should the corn be. Really, traditionally, corn is interseeded at the 6th leaf stage, so about knee-high, right about the time when you would be side dressing the corn or top dressing with nitrogen, or on your last cultivation. And that's a traditional method to do it. The best cover crop, again, it really depends on your system. If you're organic, you have generally a lot more choices, but we have found that ryegrass and radishes or some kind of brassica take the best, and clovers will also establish as well. So it really depends. I know Kirsten's going to get into that quite a bit next week, so I don't want to
steal her thunder.
Yeah, that's right.
Does rolling and crimping effectively kill vetch?
Yes. Yep. But again, it all has to happen at the right time. And I'm not saying that there's no seed in your soil that's going to, result in vetch coming back. But yes, it will effectively kill it.
Okay.
But it's got to be in bloom, and the rye's got to be in bloom too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Any concerns with no-till herbicide residue if grazing in the spring? And I know that Bill Curran talked last week a little bit about herbicides and grazing, so I definitely would recommend you going back and watching that one.
Well, and the label is the law kind of thing.
Yeah,
so
that's what he was talking about.
That is it, right? The label is the law, and if it's not, it's not a kind of thing. It's a real thing, and it's the law. So really, if you're using herbicides and you're planning to harvest for feed, you really need to look at the label and make sure that that's an acceptable practice, and it should be on the label.
Great, and we have time for one more question. We're right at 9:30. As far as rolling and crimping to terminate is concerned, is there a reason a simple smooth roller wouldn't do a sufficient job?
Um, I have seen people use cultipackers to roll down, and Francis Tickey, who was here from Iowa State or Iowa, a farmer there, that's what he was using. But a smooth roller, I mean, it should work if it's fully headed out, but the crimping does certainly help give it that final send off. Because the rye has a magical way of popping back up, so the crimping really does help.
Well, great. I know there's one more question about Latino clover, but we'll get to that next week perhaps when we're talking about cover crop variety selections for interseeding. So stay tuned for that. We'll in that webinar we'll have Kirsten Workman, who works for the University of Vermont Extension. We'll tune into her talk next Wednesday, the 11th of May. Thank you all for coming. Heather, thank you so much.
Thanks, Deb.
And have a good day, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.